So we're going to start with our first lecture, okay? The history of slavery in America. We're going to talk about just the events leading up to the Civil War. And then the next unit will be all about the Civil War. So we're first starting in 1619, when the first enslaved people are kidnapped and brought against their will to what is now the United States, okay? So they're taken over, taken from their homes, and put on these slave ships, which we'll talk about in a minute, and taken to what is now the United States. In 1776, we see the United States declaring independence from Great Britain, but slavery and enslaved people are still not free at this point. Okay, slavery is still present. In 1788, the Constitution is signed, and enslaved people are considered now 3/5 of a person. Now, when we talk about what people are considered, right? Okay, you can't see it, but there is a wasp in my room. There is a wasp in my room, and I will try and get it out before you guys come in here. But if at any point this recording stops, it's because I'm scared of this wasp. Okay. When we talk about the census, right? The census is a way of keeping track of the population of a country. So that's when we talk about someone being considered 3/5 of a person, when they're counting up how many people are in the country in 1788, one enslaved person does not equal one person, and it equals 3/5 of a person. Okay. In 1865, we have the 13th Amendment, giving enslaved people freedom. Okay. Lost track of the wasp. It's gone. I don't know where it is. Okay. Guys, I'm in here alone, and I know you're seeing this in a group of people, but it's really scary to be in here alone and not know where the wasp is. Anyway, the 13th Amendment is passed. It gives enslaved people freedom on paper, but not necessarily in real life, okay? One reason is because it takes a long time for messages to get from one side of the country to the other, okay? So people aren't knowing about this news immediately. It's not like somebody's putting it on Twitter and sending it out. It takes a while for that message to get across. And also, Southern states are just refusing to give enslaved people freedom, okay? They're just saying, we're not following the 13th Amendment. And this is something, this divide that's been happening over time, is something that's going to be a huge problem for the United States. Okay. We're no longer this one big country who agrees on most things. We're now separated into the North and the South, and that'll continue even after the Civil War. So we have 246 years after the first enslaved people are brought to the United States. They finally gain their freedom, but yet they're still not fully free. So the journey from Africa, we have, first of all, it's important to know that the continent of Africa is not one big country. It is made up of smaller countries, right? And many different countries. We see people being kidnapped and taken from their home and taken to these slave ships and taken across the ocean to what is now the United States. These slave ships are terrible, awful conditions, let alone the trauma of being taken from their families, right? This is the only place they've ever known, right? They know the land, they know where to get resources, and now they're being put on a ship and taken to a place that they've never even been before, and they have no idea where they are, right? So we'll talk about the journey here. This whole lecture is going to be about how these people go from being considered human beings to being considered property, okay? So the dehumanization of these people is what we're going to talk about when we talk about the process of enslavement. So the first way that people are not being considered human is branding, through the process of branding. So branding, we see a lot with cattle. They'll take this poker, and usually there's a symbol or two initials, right, on the end, and they'll get it red hot and they'll plunge it into somebody's skin, right? We see it a lot of times with cattle. They brand cattle. That's exactly how these people are being treated. They're being treated by like livestock, okay, like animals. And so they'll leave a mark with this brand to brand them, literally label them as property. Slave ships were not very big. We have about like an area of 5 feet 3 inches high and 4 feet 4 inches wide. Okay, so if you're super tall, you're not going to have a lot of room. They're going to be pretty cramped in there, and they're stacking them one on top of the other because they don't care about how these people feel and their conditions, right, on the ship. They just want to pack as many people as possible because once again, they're seeing them as property, right, as something to be sold. So they don't want to make as many trips. So they're stacking them one on top of the other. So I have the conditions of these people being discussed in this primary source that I have. It's from Aluda Equiano, who was a former enslaved person who later bought his freedom and then wrote his autobiography talking about conditions on the slave ships. If you'll notice here, they are stacked on top of the other. So there's not a lot of room to move around. So when somebody has to go to the bathroom or somebody gets sick, there's no place for them to go. Okay. So they're literally going to the bathroom where they are and getting sick where they are, right? People are dying next to them and these dead bodies are not removed for days and days and days. Okay. So it's terrible conditions. So Luda Equiano talks about that when he says, the closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship, which was so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of chains now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs into which the children often fell and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole a scene of horror almost inconceivable. Okay. So the biggest thing that he talks about, it's super, super hot. There's no room to move. And he also talks about a necessary tub. These necessary tubs were big tubs that they would, these people would have to go to the bathroom in. So they'd be going to the bathroom in these necessary tubs, and kids would be walking around and they'd be accidentally like falling over into these necessary tubs and almost drowning, okay, in this vat of poop and pee and waste, right? What we also know about the ocean is it's not a smooth ride, okay? The waves are coming pretty quickly and pretty violently at points. So we have these necessary tubs being sloshed around, tipped over. So waste is spilling everywhere too. We see the shrieks of women. Not only are people just in pain from leaving their families, they're also physically in pain with disease. And women are also being taken advantage of and being assaulted by the captains and the crew. Because once again, we'll see this throughout this process. We see people, when they get in a position of power in charge of a group of people, they're often so just like obsessed with this power that they take advantage of people, and they are just like, okay, the wasp is coming over here. Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on. Let me pause this. Guys, I've since moved locations. I'm in Miss Tharp's room. Don't worry, the wasp will be gone before 8th hour, so you don't have to worry about it. But I hope this was fun for you to watch me be scared. So we're talking about the treatment of enslaved people on these ships, right? It was terrible, awful. People are being taken advantage of, right? Because we have these people in these positions of power, and they're abusing this power to do what they want with these people because they don't see them as people, they see them as property. The terrible conditions on the slave ships, we see a lot of forced feedings because people just aren't eating, whether they're too weak or they are sick or they're not eating out of protest. This tool over here was used to clamp open people's mouths and force food down their throat. So it was pretty bad. What happened if you tried to escape? You were thrown overboard into the ocean. Enslaved people were insured almost like property. So it's almost, if I have a car, right, and I get into a car accident, my insurance company is going to ideally help me pay to replace different parts, similar to enslaved people when they were insured. If any of them died on the way over, the ship captain would be paid in insurance money. So we have one example of a captain throwing over 132 enslaved people overboard because of disease and lack of food. And then he claims that their ship was attacked and collected the insurance money. Okay. And that's called fraud. And you can go to jail for that now. So not good, right? So once they get into the United States, we have enslaved people being sold from the northern states down to the southern states, because that's a huge part of their economy, or the way people make money in the South is through slave labor on plantations and farms. In the South, we have a third of families owning enslaved people. So once again, this huge part of their economy. We have slave auctions, people being auctioned off. And I'm going to have my service learner bring this up on their iPad and play this onto the screen. Okay, so you can pause this video and then they will play it. It's a poem about the slave auctions, and kind of gives it more in depth. And you can go over to Miss Thorpe's room and tell her that we learned poetry during social studies. And she's giving me a thumbs up right now. Okay, so go ahead and pause this video, and I'll have my service learner play this up on the screen, because it gets kind of wonky if I play it in this like Zoom format. So do that now. So what product do we think of when we think of slavery? We think of cotton, most likely. So in the South, cotton is one of the most popular crops that's being farmed on these plantations. This is all processed by hand at first. So people will go through the fields. They'll be picking these bulbs right here. If we look at this brown stuff, that was usually really, really sharp. So it would prick their fingers. It would bleed all over the cotton. They'd be in trouble for that. They would get punished for that. But over time, it pricked their fingers so often that their fingers would just go numb, right? So that, combined with the process of separating the seed from the cotton to create this like really nice cotton fluff, was super, super difficult. And also the long hot days, right? In the South, it's super, super warm, and they're working from sunrise to sunset. Okay. So super long days, terrible working conditions. We have overseers abusing their power again, right? They are taking advantage of these workers, right? Just beating them senseless for no reason. If they're collapsing from exhaustion, they'd be punished, things like that. So they were looking for some way to make this processing of cotton easier. And that's where we get the cotton gin. So the invention of the cotton gin is what really helped make cotton production go more smoothly. We have these bowls, right? If we look at what's coming off of the stem, they're put in this machine, and then they hand crank it to separate the seeds from the cotton, and they get that clean cotton end result. So you would think with the production of cotton going smoother or more smoothly, that there wouldn't be as much of a need for slave labor, but there's actually a huge surge in slave labor. And that's because we have cotton being produced easier. So they're planting more cotton, so they need more people to harvest it. Okay. And this cotton gin was invented by Eli Whitney. That's the guy right there. So we talked about life as an enslaved person. It's awful. It's terrible. We have these people in positions of power over a group of people that are abusing that power, abusing them physically, right, for not following the rules or just because they want to. That picture is kind of hard to look at, but that's the scars on this man's back, right, from being whipped so many times. We also see owners marrying enslaved people to each other, not because these people want to get married, but to promote having children. One, to provide more workers, and two, to prevent attempts of escape and insurrection, right? People with families are less likely to escape, one, because they have to take them with, and two, because if they are caught escaping or caught trying to rise up and create a rebellion, they'll be punished, and also their family will be punished. So we see enslaved people getting together and having children for those reasons. Jumping the broom was an actual custom for marriage between enslaved people. This was like a literal signification that after they are married, they jump the broom, okay, to signify that they're married. Fighting back, we see many rebellions from enslaved people, including one by a man by the name of Nat Turner. Nat Turner was an escaped slave, but he comes back to lead this rebellion. He had several enslaved people armed with knives, swords, sticks, and guns. They went on a killing spree, killing their owners. And 60 people were killed, including a school of children, right? So they have so much pent up rage, right? So much anger from the abuse that they've endured, from the pain that these people have caused them, right? From leaving their families and being separated from their families, and the constant mistreatment that they're unleashing it at this point, right? They're killing anyone in sight to try and make a statement, right? And then the last slide for today is talking about people that were helping enslaved people. So the Fugitive Slave Act made it illegal to help free a slave. So people that were helping enslaved people gain their freedom. The Fugitive Slave Act is making them, or is outlawing that process, okay? So that could be as simple as making them pay a fine to imprisonment to death also. Harriet Tubman was one of these people that was helping other enslaved people gain their freedom. She worked with the Underground Railroad to get escaped slaves to the North. She had at one point a 40,000 dead or alive bounty on her head, and she made 19 trips and escorted over 300 slaves to freedom. And there's a really, really good video / movie on Disney Plus about Harriet Tubman. It's really good. So a different way people were fighting back was through literature, through writing. We have this book coming out at this point. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. This was a fictional story about the evils of slavery, right? So the characters in the book are fictional, are not real, but the experiences that they're going through the process of being enslaved and life as a slave are very much real. And this was the very first time that we had the public recognizing that slavery was this terrible institution, and it radicalized a lot of people, especially in the North, especially women, because this book was written by a female author. So we have a bunch of people joining the anti-slavery movement, a bunch of people speaking out saying that slavery should be abolished. I have this quote here. It says, "On the shores of our free states are emerging the poor, shattered, broken remnants of families. Men and women escaped by miraculous providences from the surges of slavery, feeble in knowledge and in many cases infirm in moral constitution, from a system which confounds and confuses every principle of Christianity and morality." Okay, they're describing slaves as poor, shattered, broken remnants of families, not only because of the suffering that they endured on the journey over from Africa and the suffering that they endured or went through on the plantations in the South, but also the journey from the South to the North, escaping slavery. It was not an easy task. So by the time they get to the North, they're very shattered and broken. And then we also have, she talks about feeble in knowledge. They did not teach enslaved people how to read or write because they were afraid that, one, they wouldn't learn how to escape and be able to communicate back and forth. And two, they would be able to organize and rise up against and take over the plantations, or at least try and rebel. Okay, because in order to rebel, you need to gather a group of people, and that requires sending out a message, right? And they wanted to try and prevent that by not teaching them how to read. And then Christianity, it talks about the system of slavery goes against every principle of Christianity. We're going to see a lot, especially this unit and the next, of the South's decisions based in religion and Christianity. They are making decisions, for example, that slavery should be legal, that they should be allowed to own slaves, because they say the Bible told them to, okay? And that's not necessarily true. They are cherry picking things from the Bible, meaning they're taking different things and words and sentences and piecing them together to create evidence. And that's wrong. Okay. It's not like the Bible comes out and says this. They're also changing things in the Bible and putting their own words in there. But they're using religion as this foundation for not just their government, but why they're making decisions. And we'll talk about that in the next unit. John Brown is the topic of our debate. He was an abolitionist who is a person who opposes the practice of slavery. He had carried out an anti-slavery campaign from Kansas to the east. He had planned to originally raid a federal arsenal or a gun warehouse with the intention of stealing weapons and starting a revolt. He was unsuccessful, and he is captured and found guilty of murder. He's actually sentenced to death along with people that were helping him. The reason why he's going off to Kansas is at this time, we have 2 new states coming in, Kansas and Nebraska. And before this, there was this law called the Missouri Compromise. And that basically said anything above this line that they drew on the map, anything above it, states coming in would be free states. Anything below would be considered a slave state. Okay. And so when we have these new states coming in, Kansas and Nebraska, they're originally supposed to follow that rule with the Missouri Compromise, but the president at the time just threw things out the window, threw the Missouri Compromise away, and basically said, hey, it's up to you guys, the people inhabiting or living in Kansas and Nebraska, to decide whether or not they want to be a slave or a free state. Okay. So then we get a bunch of people going out to Kansas and Nebraska and trying to fight it out to see which one each state's going to be. Okay. It was really, really violent. It's called Bleeding Kansas, is that whole ordeal. But the idea that these states were left up with the right to choose is called popular sovereignty. Okay. They were leaving it up to Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves. This idea was created by Stephen Douglas, who is this gentleman right there. And we will talk about him, especially when we talk about our buddy Babe Lincoln, because they ran against each other for political office in Illinois. But popular sovereignty is what makes all of these decisions descend into madness and a lot of violence. And that's where John Brown is leading his revolt, right, out in Bleeding, Kansas. So that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, I'll see you in the next video.